Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce the speakers for today's session. So all our speakers are experts in the field of plant protein and plant-based ingredients and their applications for plant-based smart protein products. So this evening we have with us Dr. Saikat Mazumdar and Dr. Roopa Banerjee from the International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics, ICRISAT, Hyderabad. And then we have with us Dr. Venkateswarlu and Ms. Kiranmayi from the Indian Institute of Millets Research, Hyderabad. And we also have with us Dr. Girish Ganjyal from the Washington State University. So I welcome you all to this section, and I thank you all for your time, and we really look forward to the session. So with this brief introduction, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Saikat and Dr. Roopa Banerjee to proceed with the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Padma. And first of all, a big congratulations to Good Food Institute to have been, I think this is your second the seminar, the event, and I was privileged to be part of the first one too. And thanks for the opportunity again to come and share whatever learnings we have gathered over the last 1 year now and to interact with the participants. So briefly, I would like to just talk about ICRISAT, and we are an International Agriculture Research Institute, and our work is basically on the dryland crops, and that's why we are here to talk about millets and also pulses, because they go hand in hand and they sort of complement each other in terms of a lot of nutritional properties. Especially we know that the amino acid profile, the millets are sort of good sources of the sulfur containing amino acids, and then you have the pulses, which are good sources of lysine, and then they complement each other. But there are a lot of other aspects which we need to leverage as part of this smart protein initiative, and that's what we're going to touch upon, some of our germplasms and some of the experiments which we have done towards trying to see how we could mainstream millets along with pulses into this initiative of smart protein. So I'll just share the screen as we move along, and then also I think Dr. Roopa would be taking over at some point of time and talk about the different aspects of using millet-based ingredients and ingredient optimization. So is the screen visible? And
yes, our screen is visible. The presentation.
Yes, and the slideshow too.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. So I think with this, I would like to hand over to Dr. Roopa to move ahead with the presentation. Over to you, Dr. Roopa.
Thank you, Dr. Saikat. Good evening, all. It's a pleasure and privilege to be part of this gathering today. I take you through millet-based ingredients and ingredient optimization from the view of ICRISAT today. Can we go to the next slide, please? So millets is a strategy towards healthy and sustainable diets. If we shift our cropping patterns towards coarse cereals and pulses, it'll make India's food systems not only healthier, but also environmentally more sustainable. Our mandate crops at ICRISAT are pearl millet, finger millet, sorghum, little millets, and legumes, which include pigeon pea, chickpea, and groundnut. It's a well-known fact that a well-planned diet of plant-based whole foods incorporating a variety of vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and legumes are tools to address chronic lifestyle diseases. Here's where millets play a very important role, especially being gluten-free. They're gaining importance as an ingredient in the multigrain and gluten-free cereal products. Next slide, please.
Is it changed, the slide?
No.
Okay, let me see. No?
Yes. So today's focus of the talk will be on two ingredients, the starch fraction, which is from the point of view of nutritional fractions, and protein, which will be the grain storage proteins. Next slide, please. So taking you through dryland crops diversity, at ICRISAT, we have a global diversity representation of germplasm of these crops that I was talking about. ICRISAT serves as a world repository for the collection of germplasm of 11 crops. Studies are being conducted at ICRISAT to profile these accessions of sorghum and pearl millet, and also the legumes, and identify lines with desirable nutritional and prebiotic traits for development of functional foods. ICRISAT crop improvement and material sharing resulted in release of 1,224 varieties in 81 countries. ICRISAT has also been awarded the Africa Food Prize for 2021 for improving food security in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. So if we look at the typical nutritional composition of millets in comparison with cereals, it's very clear that in terms of minerals, as well as unsaturated fatty acids, as well as certain other nutritional components, millets rank higher than our conventional cereals. So if you see, finger millet is a very good source of calcium, bioavailable calcium, to be be exact, that the calcium available from finger millet is actually absorbed by the body. It's been proven. Little millets are good sources of iron. And like I said, ICRISAT has a collection of germplasm, and these diverse varieties give us the possibility of selecting the best possible choices in terms of all the nutritional profiles shown here. Next slide, please. Similarly with pulses, pulses especially are a good source of protein, and the quality of protein from pulses and that of millets complement each other and give us the possibility of quality nutritional profile from composite foods. And as you see, chickpea, Bengal gram, which is a mandate crop of ICRISAT, has about 21% protein typically, and also tur dal, which has about 10%, 9 to 10% protein. Can we go to the next slide, please? These are also rich source of dietary fiber and bioactive components like polyphenols. Now, like I said, we have the possibility of selecting the best possible germplasm lines in terms of the attribute we prefer to integrate in our final product. So climate smart protein rich chickpea and pigeon pea is being researched by ICRISAT. We have developed high protein varieties with enhanced nutrition and industrial food applications. ICRISAT has access to large collection of germplasm, like I said, and some of these chickpea varieties have about 28% protein content. So we have improved not only the contents, but all protein contents in terms of quantity, but also quality. And we're also working on PDCAS methods like PDCAS, which are standard protein quality assessment methods. I'll take you through that in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So when we look at the nutritional and nutraceutical properties of pulses, pulses stand out very much. As you see in the slide, pulses are anyway an important part of our traditional foods because it is known to contribute to a balanced diet. Apart from that, pulses are a good source of slowly digestible starch, which relates to low GI. Pulses are very high in fiber, containing both soluble and insoluble fibers. They're also good sources of vitamins and minerals. Pulses typically contain about twice the amount of protein found in whole grain cereals. Pulses complement well with rice or wheat, thus providing a nutritionally balanced diet. In fact, we also have formulated products for targeting children's cohorts, where we have made composite products with pulses and millets and have got very good bioavailability data as well. The nutraceutical qualities of pulses make them particularly helpful in the fight against some non-communicable diseases. Scientific evidences show that consumption of pulse protein as part of regular diets helps prevent or treat a number of lifestyle diseases such as cardiovascular conditions, cancers, type 2 diabetes, or gluten intolerance. Next slide, please. Coming to starch as a health benefiting ingredient. When we look at starch, we look at the whole carbohydrate. We look at it as part of the carbohydrate fraction. But like I will show you in the next slide, starch is nutritionally functional in terms of 3 fractions. So this is a classical fractionation brought to us by Englist, where starch is actually classified into rapidly digestible starch, slowly digestible starch, and resistant starch. This classification is based on the digestibility of starch when we ingest it, and our measurements also that we do, in vitro measurements to classify these starch fractions from grains and foods, are based on an in vitro method that simulates gut conditions. So as you see, RDAs, or the rapidly digestible starch, is that fraction of starch that is digested completely in the human intestine and is measured as the starch digested within the first 20 minutes of enzyme hydrolysis. So it's that fraction of the starch that provides glucose to the body immediately. Whereas slowly digestible starch is that fraction which is more consistently giving us glucose when we ingest it, and is measured as the starch digested between 20 and 120 minutes of enzyme hydrolysis. The last fraction, the resistant starch fraction, is actually the non-digestible part and is classified as a dietary fiber fraction, and is not digested but is fermented in the small intestine, but is also a bioactive fraction because it serves as a prebiotic and helps in flourishing of the probiotics in the gut, contributing to gut health. Next slide, please. So here I've shown you a very simple way of profiling the starch granules in terms of quantifying the slowly digestible starches. This is one of our pictures from pearl millet varieties. And as you know, amylose part of the starch has amylose and amylopectin. So the amylose portion of the starch is what contributes more to grain quality in terms of and also in terms of product functionality. So based on the staining by iodine, we can actually differentiate between how much amylose, if the variety is a high amylose containing variety or a low amylose containing variety. And further, this amylose correlates with the slowly digestible fraction of the starch. Next slide, please. Coming to the millet resistant starch, like I said, this is also a bioactive fraction of the starch. Pearl millet, finger millet, and legumes are good sources of resistant starch. It's part of the dietary fiber fraction, which is undigested but contributes to gut health, being a prebiotic, and are associated with probiotics. And we also have characterized certain finger millet and sorghum varieties associated with these natural probiotics. Next slide, please. Coming to the grain storage proteins. So grain storage proteins make millets and pulses both lucrative as an ingredient again. So how are these classified? Classically, grain storage proteins are classified into 4 fractions based on their solubilities. The water-soluble part is albumin, the salt-soluble part is globulin, the aqueous alcohol-soluble part is the prolinen, and dilute acid or alkali soluble, or the part that can be solubilized with other reducing agents is called glutenins. And we have different protein extraction methods evaluated and standardized based on extraction yields and efficiency in delivering the desired functional characteristics to the product. Next slide, please. So again, showing a flow chart of the Osborne protein fractionation. And I've also shown you a picture of one of our fractionation, extracted protein products and fractionation from finger millet. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here, this slide actually details the different storage protein fractions from 2 varieties each of sorghum and pearl millet. This was a classical publication from ICRISAT in the 80s. Here again, the fractionation is not typically Osborne's. You can see 6 fractions here. This is a little bit different kind of fractionation where the extraction solvents are a little different. And here we classify it into 6 fractions: albumin and globulin, prolamine, cross-linked prolamine, glutenin, light, glutenin, and finally the residue. So as you see, pearl millet is mostly dominated by the water-soluble albumin, the salt-soluble globulins, and the alcohol-soluble prolamines, while sorghum is mostly dominated by glutenins. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here, the possibility of structural and molecular analysis of these protein fractions is also there at ICRISAT, and we can do it by SDS page, which is the classical method again, but a very reliable method to study these grain storage protein fractions. What I've shown you here is from foxtail millet. It's from a publication. And as you see, if you look at the slide very closely, you can see the importance of the reducing agents in deciphering the sulfur content of the protein fractions. If you see lane number 4 on C, they are the prolamines which have been reduced using reducing agents and hence run on a lower molecular weight range, proving that these prolamines are sulfur rich. They have sulfur-rich amino acids. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt you. So we have 3 more minutes.
Yeah, sure. So then I will quickly take you through the next few slides. Again, I have shown you this slide stresses the importance of the presence of essential amino acids in millets. And as you can see that they are, unlike conventional belief, millets certain lines are good sources of quality amino acids. Next slide, please. This is a flowchart showing you the scale up of protein extraction. Again, it is based on solvent, liquid extraction, mostly based on different solubility in different solvents. And we play around with solvents and drying precipitation processes and drying technologies to come up with best yields and best quality proteins. Next, please. So we also, it's important to know what the guidelines are for claiming high protein products. And this is the slide that shows what your product in fact should contain, how much protein it should contain if you have to claim it as a high protein source. Next, please. So functional properties of pulse, flour, dietary fiber, and starches and protein I've already talked to you about a little bit. As you know, these have good solubility, good water and oil binding capacity, foaming, gelation, and viscosity, imparting properties, and excellent emulsification properties, which allow us to use them as an ingredient in products. Next, please. So knowing that these have such good health benefiting properties as well gives us the possibility of going into these many product categories such as weight management, CVD, diabetes, and other lifestyle diseases. We also optimize ingredient and validate nutrition retention and, like I said, functionality in the final product. We have all these assays for that: bioavailability and shelf life, rancidity profiling, and of course, different processing conditions. Like I said, we also have the method to correlate SDS to GI. We do PD-Cas, and we also profile for antioxidant activity. Next, please. So I think these 2 slides, Dr. Saikat can take you through quickly.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Roopa, and for the elaborate presentation and telling the audience about what is possible and what is critical in understanding and the steps. So here, this is an example of trying to see what is the proof of concept of which we try to do in terms of seeing whether we could explore getting millets into the smart protein segment. And indeed, this is an example where we try to incorporate finger millet into texturized vegetable protein preparation, which goes into then making different meat analog based products. And we indeed were successful. And as you can see here, this was at 20% incorporation on finger millet. And by incorporating that, we were actually able to improve the taste profile and also the textural profile of the high moisture meat analog. And this is something which was very promising. And based on that, we are now moving ahead in terms of exploring other millet varieties in the alternate protein segment. So in summary, this proof of concept showed us that adding millets actually brought the product closer to the actual meat in terms of a number of parameters. And of course, the last slide here, we wanted to show how we are able to actually capture the environmental impact of incorporating millets into this particular segment. And definitely this question is being raised a number of times, is how can we quantify it? And this is something in terms of the global warming potential, which is in terms of kg carbon dioxide per kg of produce, which we have been able to show here. And as you can see here, this particular product here is having close to around maybe 1 or 1.5, and even lower than rice and wheat. And of course, as you can see here, the actual animal products are standing much, much ahead, with beef being at around 50 kg kg CO2 per kg of produce. So in summary, I would like to conclude that given the properties, the different functional properties, the huge germplasm collection and the diversity, there's a lot of opportunity for us to actually explore and understand the functionalities. We have not presented here, but we are also getting into predictive modeling, where we are trying to see if we could actually predict the functional properties based on the nutritional properties. And that's something which is very critical if we want to actually identify different varieties of millets or explore different ingredients. We need to understand the functionality with respect to the model food system in which you want to use them. And of course, it is very important for us to link it with environmental sustainability and move ahead. So with this, I would like to thank Dr. Roopa and also Good Food Institute for giving us this opportunity to present our views, and look forward to continuing this engagement. And of course, I think we have an opportunity to actually host one of the teams at ICRISAT, and we look forward to further interacting with you all. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for the informative presentation. So it provided a lot of insights into millet-derived starch and protein and their characteristics and functionality. So we have some questions in the chat box. So if we can quickly go through that. I'll read out the questions for you. There's a question from Fatima. Should we need to consider all the nutritional components of millets, pulses, or legumes besides protein content while choosing for ingredient optimization?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. I'll try to answer that. See, as I told you, we have already done some work, and we have seen that it is not only protein which affects the functionality. It is a number of combinations of different other aspects. So Dr. Roopa talked about starch. Then there is a correlation between the nutritional profile and how the nutritional, based on the change in nutritional profile, the functionality is changing. So so it's not just looking into protein, but then the interaction which is happening. And of course, that's where we are talking about predictive modeling to understand the functionality. Yeah, anything, Dr. Roopa, you want to add on this?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to this. One, when you're including a purified ingredient, a purified component as an ingredient, and one where you're including the flour itself as an ingredient. So you see, millets and pulses are so good nutritionally that you can actually think of them as it is as ingredient, right? So in that case, the complete profiling becomes important. So how are you're value adding to the whole product by including the whole pulse or the whole grain into the product? Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next question is from Anush. Pulses are known to have anti-nutrient components. How do we process them to retain maximum nutrients and reduce the anti-nutritional factors?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are worried about anti-nutrients. But unlike animals, we are not eating any of these products raw. So I think most of our processes or processing which we undertake, actually traditionally even, you see that there is an effort to reduce the anti-nutrients. So anti-nutrients are actually reduced even by simple cooking and boiling. For millets, we have the process of malting, which reduce anti-nutrients. So definitely, as we process these products, it is important for us to understand and incorporate those processing or unit operations, as we call in food science, that will take care of these anti-nutrients. So I wouldn't worry much about anti-nutrients, but we should have a strategy in place as to see, as we process, what are the unit operations which are to be incorporated or are already taking care of this as part of the process, and maybe have a few indicators to measure whether the anti-nutrients have been taken away or not. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So there is one more question from Sohail. How do you deal with the taste? So I think you're asking about the taste associated with the plant proteins. That is the question. How to deal with the taste?
Yeah, so taste has been a major challenge, and I think you are right, very apt question, because the best looking product will not sell unless this taste is taken care of. So I think, yes, as we move along, sometimes as we do the extraction process itself, the taste or the off orders are taken care of. There are methods of actually removing off orders. And I think as part of the product development, this particular aspect of looking at off orders at each stage of the process needs to be taken care of. So whether if somebody is incorporating a flour and then at the flour level, or if they're extracting a protein, then after extraction of protein, is the off order still there, or if it is not there, then appropriate steps should be incorporated to remove that. And of course, the final product also is important. And if that is not possible, there are ways to actually mask the taste or mask the odor. So I think it has to be multiple strategies that can be implemented, and the technologies are available. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Just being conscious of time, we'll just take one more question. So there's a question from Pooja. What can we do for utilizing the starch side streams after protein extraction?
Yeah, maybe Dr. Roopa, you want to answer the question.
Yeah. So there are a number of possibilities apart from food-based possibilities. Like if you see, look at the corn industry. The starch is integrated into a lot of other industries. So we can think of biopolymer industries, pharmaceuticals need these biopolymers, food industry, packaging industry itself could use these as biopolymers. So, as I said, as a food ingredient also it can be used, the side stream.
Yeah, just want to add one more point to this. If you look at the product development approach, so right now we are only focusing on protein, but then the starch also has a number of functionalities. So whenever you are doing product development and looking at functionality of protein, I would say you also look at the functionality of starch, because there are a lot of important functionalities which could be actually working synergistically with the protein to actually give you a good omelette or a plant-based omelette or a plant-based meat. That's what we saw in our finger millet, because we used the whole finger millet flour, and the fiber itself was contributing to the fiberness of the meat, or getting close to meaty texture. So I think, yes, we should look at it in a holistic manner and see opportunities of utilizing that starch or the byproduct itself in the current process, or as Dr. Roopa said, there are a lot of other streams in which that can be used up. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. So there are other questions. So I really request the participants to direct the questions to us, and we will make sure to forward the questions to the experts. So thank you once again, sir and ma'am, for this presentation and for answering all the questions. So we'll move to the next speaker. So I would request Dr. Venkateswarlu and Ms. Kiranmai to take the session forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Padma. I'll share my presentation. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to Indian Institute of Millets Research, Ganjyal. Our mandate is also similar to ICRISAT, where we are mainly focusing on millets. And of course, our institute's main mandate is crop improvement, where we will be developing varieties, better agronomy, and also for nutrition. And apart from that, we are also focusing on developing value chains. In case of millets, we have an incubation center called NutriHub, which is incubating a lot of startups and also providing training and also sometimes cooking with millets classes like that. So after an exhaustive presentation of Dr. Roopa and Dr. Saikat, I have little left to touch upon the core concept of nutrition and use of the ingredients. However, I will try to explain those aspects which are also important in determining the shelf life and also the niche markets, depending upon the positioning of the product. So myself and my colleague Kiranmai will be taking this presentation. Yeah. So as you already know, we are now focusing on the plant-based products. We know that a good source of protein are available from meats. However, when we are considering the plant-based products, we should see that it is the overall product that matters. Apart from protein, there are other ingredients also which are health promoting. And in that concept, we generally consider that we are not consuming enough protein because vegetarian sources are generally less in protein compared to meat-based sources. However, during our education, we were taught that egg protein or meat proteins are considered the standard for comparing any other proteins. But if you see the global trend, those people who have adopted vegetarian diets, consuming vegetarian food, seems to be more healthy compared to those who are consuming more non-vegetarian based diets. There could be multiple reasons for that. However, we focus on different ingredients that are coming together in case of plant-based foods compared to meat-based foods. So I think these aspects are already covered. I won't much dwell on this. I will quickly go to the main aspects of that. So to meet the sustainable development goals, agriculture is an important operation to reduce hunger, to slow down the climate change, and also to feed
Sorry to
swelling
interrupt,
population.
sir. Are you moving your slide? Because we are just still on the first slide.
Oh, sorry. I think I'm moving the slides. You're not able to see the next ones.
Still on the first slide for us.
Oh, okay. I'm able to see slides moving.
Harini, are you able to see the next slide?
No, no, Dr. Venkat. Perhaps you can stop
Okay.
sharing and reshare once again.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Sir, are you using two screens?
In the sense?
No, is it one screen or you have two screens?
No, I have only one screen.
Then I think you run it full screen, sir. In presentation mode.
Yeah, I'm clicking that slideshow mode.
Yeah.
Okay, when I click that, it will open in slideshow, but I'm not able to see the Zoom link.
You share the screen now? Because we
When
can,
yes.
is it the same screen? Now I can see your face. But you can share the screen, please.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Are you able to see the slide now?
Yeah. Good for planet, good for farmers. It is
Yeah.
fine.
Is it changing now? I'm changing the slides.
It is not changing. So you just
Oh.
change the. I think full screen is. You're on full screen now.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it is showing somewhere else. Maybe I'm not sure.
Okay.
Can you close it and open it in slideshow mode, like outside Zoom, and then try to share that tab?
Once I go to show. One second.
There is a resume slideshow. It is
Now can you
showing
see the
now.
slides moving?
Yes, it's
Hmm.
moving.
This is better. Yes.
Yes,
This
sir.
It's moving
Yes.
now?
It's
Yeah,
moving.
okay, I think we'll go with this. When
Sure.
I am activating the slideshow, it's not moving. Yeah,
Moving now, please. You
okay.
can please.
So, yeah. Okay, sorry for the disturbance. Okay, so we are moving straight to the actual points. So, regarding the Sustainable Development Goals, agriculture is an important aspect to achieve them. And UN has declared International Day of Millets 2023 to be celebrated to promote millets so that they become a part of our diet. So millets are designated as nutriceuticals, and official gazette notification has come so that to push millets and to create demand so that at least some people adopt in their regular diets. And as I already presented, they are good for the planet, farmers, good for you, and good for the business also, those who are venturing into millets. And briefly, the points are, millets are considered gluten-free. So they are suitable for celiac patients who have gluten allergy. And they are also rich in dietary fiber, as already presented by previous speakers. And they are rich source of calcium and also iron and zinc, two important minerals which are important for growing children and pregnant women. And they have slow releasing carbohydrates, low glycemic index, and also they are reasonably good source of protein content. This is already presented, and we see a lot of variability in the protein content of millets. If you see proso millet, it is one of the richest sources that we see when we are analyzing the samples. Sometimes it go up to even 17 to 18% protein. So in the breeding programs, we are trying to incorporate these traits so that the grain we get, although sometimes there is a little bit of yield penalty, we are trying to improve the protein that such type of grain, we will have more amount of protein. So this is already presented. We see that apart from calcium, which is high in finger millet, we also have high content of iron and zinc, along with that magnesium also. If you see the magnesium content in general rice that we consume, it is hardly 19 mg per 100 gram, while most of our millets are having higher content of magnesium and also iron and zinc. So iron deficiency is mainly due to one thing, lesser availability of iron from plant-based sources, bioavailability part, and also overall less content of iron in case of highly processed either flours like wheat flour or rice flour. They are the sole diet of the person. So in such case, millets adds diversity to the food and also helping improving the availability of our pearl millet, which is in general of all the grains, that is having higher iron content compared to all other grains. It goes up to almost 64 ppm comparative. If you see, it is hardly 6 ppm in case of polished rice. So this is already presented. We have analyzed around 110 millet cultivars, and we found that there is a large variability in terms of grain nutrient composition. So in such case, when you want to make a product, so you need to test the raw material. Suppose there are finger millet varieties which range in calcium content from around 2000 ppm, that is 200 mg per 100 gram, up to 350 mg per 100 gram. So in such cases, you need to test the raw material so that you can have a final product which is rich in that particular nutrient. So similarly, we have wide variability for protein in case of certain millets. And one more aspect with millets is our sorghum, millets. They can be consumed as whole grains. although sometimes processing is done for various other reasons like enhancing shelf life or for enhancing the taste, but they can also be consumed as whole grains. However, other small millets like kodo millet, barnyard millet, foxtail millet, little and proso millet, they have a husk layer like rice. In such cases, we have to remove the husk. So once you remove the husk, you have below that an aleurone layer, which is rich in fiber content, vitamins and minerals. However, as we are disturbing the outer layer of the grain, there is a possibility of rancidity development. So this is a major challenge in case of small millets, because once we disturb the cell structure, the enzymes will come in contact with their substrate. Suppose lipase, it will be accessing the fat and will release free fatty acids, which will further undergo oxidation and develop off flavors. So in such cases, we have to decide what should be the level of polishing in the grain. So once we know that, okay, this amount of polishing will give me this type of raw material, and that decides the texture profile, the taste profile of your product, and also the shelf life of the product. So in such cases, it is important to choose what millet is going into your final product. So similarly, coming to the millet grain structure, it is like a grain similar to any other grain structure. However, because these are small millets, sometimes say suppose pearl millet, we generally have a germ content which is larger compared to the whole grain. In the sense, the ratio of germ to whole grain is higher in case of pearl millet. In such cases, there is a what you call development of rancidity in case of flour. When you mill the whole grain, there is quick development of rancidity. Probably within 5 to 7 days, the flour becomes rancid. Unless you treat it with either heat treatment or blanching. There are an array of processing methods to enhance shelf life. So in such cases, there is a lot of challenge for storage of the raw material, when to use that one in the product, and also how long the product is going to stay. So these are the different physical forms of the product that we can use in the development of the product. Suppose if you see will looks after removal of the husk. So after polishing, its color also will slightly change. And then if you look at within the grain, the endosperm texture determines the amylose and amylopectin content, and also the milling characters. Suppose the grain more flour. So in such case, you may not be able to make rava or semolina from that. So a particular type of grain is needed for a particular operation. If you look at other products we have, like semolina or flours, so we can have different processing operations to enhance the taste and also the particle size and what type of products we would like to use. And from the whole grain, you can also make flakes or puffs or pops, a different version of the same flaking process, and also extruded products from mixing the flours. So the physical type of the ingredient will determine what type of product you can make and its organoleptic properties. So millets, most of the millets, because they do not have gluten, of course, the starch can be gelatinized and made into certain type of products. But if you need to make only a particular type of product, then you might need to bring different types of ingredients together to make a final product. And like functional properties like what you call viscosity or water holding capacity or gelatinization, they are on par with the other grains which are used for normal processing purposes. And as I already touched upon the shelf life content, so depending upon the type of operation, you need to look at the shelf life of the products. Suppose if a whole grain is stored, undehulled whole grain, you can store it up to maybe a year. And if you are dehulling it, maybe up to 4 to 5 months, depending upon the level of polish. And then if you are milling the product, then it is only up to 2 to 3 months. Whether you are refining the flour or you are just using it as a whole grain flour. Then value-added products, depending upon the baking temperatures, the combination of ingredients that are gone in, it may be up to 2 to 4 months. And to improve shelf life, there are a lot of processing operations. However, you need to balance. You need to take a call how much you want to process the grain to achieve the nutrient composition you are desiring. And in case of extruded products, maybe you can extend the shelf life up to 9 months. And at IIMR, we have a Nutri Hub and also a Center of Excellence, where we have developed a lot of products optimized with different levels of millet ingredients, so that they can be quickly taken up by the startups and or small, small manufacturers, so that they can quickly go into the market and popularize products. So usually when you have a system of where local production, local processing and local utilization, then I think we can achieve better nutritional content in the final product without compromising on the higher shelf life required for wider market access. So we've also done a few trials with PDU for developing plant-based protein products like cold extruded product blending at 10 to 30% of millet flours, and also analog sorghum milk for substitute of milk for those who have protein or lactose intolerances. And also it is possible for separation of protein using physical methods like air fractionation. So yeah, so and in that case, there are emerging applications with protein-based products from plants in a lot of other areas, as already discussed by previous presenters. And in case of millets, as it is the International Year of Millets, as declared in the budget and declared by Minister Shri Narendra Ji. So we have taken up a lot of initiatives at IIMR, where we are going to develop a global center of excellence on millets with testing facilities for incubation of startups, and also development of new varieties, breeding and other crop improvement technologies. And we are also popularizing them by bringing in popular actors and other popular people, so that they can endorse the products and enhance the outreach, especially in niche markets. Of course, highly processed foods with high costs may not be suitable for mass consumption. However, when we are targeting a niche market, we need to put them in right perspective, so that right people picks up the product. These are the two startups that have incubated with our institute, which are already into millet-based products like millet drinks or millet-based meal. And my plate for the day includes not only cereals, pulses, along with that as millets of one of the components, so that it becomes a wholesome diet. So in single line, we can say a diversified diet is a balanced diet, in that trying to improve the nutrient composition and balancing the different nutrients, so that we can achieve better health outcomes using diet as one of the important components in a healthy lifestyle. So I'll close here, and my colleague Ms. Kiranmai will add some points. Over to you, Kiranmai.
So before you start, Kiranmai, so we have 2-3 more minutes.
Okay. You want me to go?
Yes, sir, you can go, sir. I think everything you covered.
Yeah, if you have a few points, you can, yeah.
So what is there when we are using millets as an ingredient? First of all, we should know their characteristics of the grains. Already they have told. So because we should see the endosperm texture especially. So in that endosperm texture, 2 types of textures are available in millets. One is flory endosperm texture and corneous endosperm texture. So when we are going for the flour making and for extraction of products, plant-based protein extraction from the millets, we can go for the selection of the flory endosperm texture. This we should know first to select before selecting the ingredient as a millet. And also one thing we can do it in the distribution of the whole grain. So in the distribution of the whole grain, see after dehulling, if you see the dehulling process, we are removing the husk from the millets. So that is a dehulling process. So when we are dehulling, we are getting the different fractions from that. So we are getting whole grains as well as we are also getting this dehulled grains and some portion of the brokens. So this brokens, we observed that this brokens is having the highest protein content comparatively the whole and dehulled grains. So this is also go as a byproduct. So we can use this byproduct into our, we can make extraction of the protein from the millets. Then this byproduct also we can use as a extraction of the protein for making the ingredient like a extracted protein from the millets. This is also we can think about that. So like that, we have to select the ingredients, then only go for the extraction of the process. Extraction or blending of the materials like millets has a high protein, like this brokens has high protein content. Likewise, we can mix it with other ingredients like soya or pulses, moong and other things. So we can get it the complete protein on our final product. So like whatever the essential amino acids are required for making complete protein, similar to the meat and this meat based proteins, we can make that combination, that combination level also we can go with as a millet as an ingredient. So with this I'll conclude. If any questions is there, I'll answer.
Thank you, Dr. Venkateswarlu and Kiranmai for this comprehensive presentation and for sharing highlighting the potential of millets as ingredients for plant-based meat products, and also for highlighting the initiatives of IIMR under the International Year of Millets. So in the conscious of time, we'll take one question. So Srikant has asked a question like how millets can form a base ingredient for plant-based meat, as millets contain low protein content than other sources such as soy and lentils. Over to you.
Hello.
Yeah. We lost you in between your video. It's fine.
Yeah. I didn't get the question.
I can repeat.
Yeah, please.
So the question is, how can millets form the base ingredient for plant-based meat products? Because they have low protein content than the other sources like soy and lentils.
Okay. I'll try to answer that, and also my colleague will add to that. So if you look at the protein content, we need to extract the protein to enhance it to reach the level that is required for achieving a texture in case of meat. So in such case, we have to follow some extraction method. Either you degrade the starch or have a physical method wherein starch particles can be separated from the protein-rich particles, so that by enhancing the protein content and then building with other ingredients if required, you can achieve the texture of the meat. Because in case of meat, of course, the texture and the taste, these are the two ingredients that define it. Of course, we can balance the amino acid composition and everything by blending different sources. However, these two need to be achieved only using a proper level of protein and other ingredients that go into the product. Kiranmai, you would like to add some other points?
Yes, sir. So we know that for making meat analogs, we require 80% protein content is required for making the meat analogs. So here, what we observed in the initial research, millets got 40% of the protein we recovered with the this enzymatic treatments and all. So we need to go for extracting more on that, so that we will get the some quantity like with at least concentrates or something, we'll get it from the millets. So that we will blend with the other pulses, which is not having the amino acid profilings lacking, which is lacking in millets and which is lacking in the pulses. We'll blend this and we'll make the complete protein, as well as we will get the required textured meat texture, we'll get it. So this is where we can go millets as a one ingredient for making a plant-based products.
Thank you, Kiranmai. Thank you, sir, for taking up the questions. We can move to the next speaker. I would like to invite Dr. Girish Ganjyal to take forward and share his presentation with us.
Can you hear me okay, Padma?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it was really good to hear all the presenters before me, and it actually makes it a lot easier for me to go through my presentation because they've gone through a lot. So thank you for that. So let me share my screen. Right. Can you let me, you're seeing the screen with the presentation?
Yes, we can see your screen. If you can please go to the slideshow mode.
All right. Did it work?
Yes, yes.
Right, perfect. Okay. All right, let me jump into it. Should be a short presentation, then I'll try my best to have some time for questions. Okay. All right, so I'm going to first talk a little bit about the program we have here at WSU in relation to food ingredients and processing. So the program we have, it's a combined research and extension program where research, I think all of you know that, where research is, obviously finding or exploring or solving things. And the extension portion is where we work with the stakeholders, like all of you, companies, processors, growers, and we try to pass on the technologies and help solve problems. So our extension program is divided into these 3 buckets of work. Here where my cursor shows, this is where we work with broader industry issues. So we work with all the commodity groups. These are all the different categories of raw materials we work with. And then we also do a lot of training programs. And through the training programs, you'll see a whole list here, but what is more relevant to this audience would be the food ingredient technology, the extrusion processing, and the product development. These 3 courses that we do, which are open to the public. And a lot of the times we try to address latest issues that are going on in the industry. And along with that, we also focus on food safety. So the food safety trainings are essentially geared towards making sure the food production is happening in a safe manner. So those are our training programs. And then we also work individually with the companies. And this is where we address a lot of the majority of the work we address are scale ups, because often it's easier to make a product on a bench scale, and then scaling it up to a large scale production is where typically companies face difficulties maintaining the quality of the product. And that's where the whole concept of ingredient functionality and process interactions come into play. So we help along with that part. Right. And in terms of research, we work on ingredient modifications, and this top group here, we try to assess the quality through not necessarily nutrition, but more so on the just the composition, but then more on the functional properties. That's what we focus on. Because for us, when you develop a food product, it has to have good texture and taste. And I think all of you, all the speakers mentioned about that. So that's where we focus more on the functionality of ingredients. And then technology-wise, these are the 3 technologies we work with. And then in terms of the final product, we try to characterize the finished product for its texture. But here it says on the research, we focus more on non-invasive techniques. Okay, Now, just from now, what I'll do is I'll try to give you some concepts as we think of fluids and ingredients, and I think it echoes a lot of what other speakers have mentioned. So food ingredients, when we look at any grain, any seed, does not matter what it is. We always break that up into its major components. It's a starch, protein, fiber. Typically, those are the three major components. And then you have, in some cases, you have higher fat, but not often. And then, of course, there's a little bit of moisture and all the protein, all the micronutrients. I group them into that. So understanding the composition is the number one thing. And then focusing on functionality of the whole mixture and then functionality of the individual components. It matters a lot, in our experience, when you assess, let's say, the viscosity of the let's say 10% solution of the ingredient as a whole seed or the whole grain flour versus just the starch, significant differences. This one, I think you guys will get these slides, but like I said, first we typically take the ingredient or the raw material and break it down into what are its components, because it tells us a lot about how it can be processed. So for example, I'll go up here, chickpea has 6% fat in it, right? So when you try to extrude this as a whole flour, you're going to have a lot of problems because it's going to slip through the machine easily, and you're not going to get a good expansion. Because we have learned over the years as a scientific society how different components process. So understanding what components are present in the raw material makes it a lot easier to understand how you can process it. So the ingredient wise, there's a lot of things available in pretty much for any grain, except the new grains that people are exploring. So you can look at it as a whole seed flour, but then you get everything that is in there. And then you can, next step is typically the degermed or decorticated seed flour. And then goes into the fractionated starches and fractionated proteins. And different levels of fractionation impacts the functionality. And then, of course, in terms of fibers, it's a soluble and insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber is typically on the outside hull or the skin, and soluble fibers is typically inside the seed. And then you have, so until here is what basic fractionation happens, but then people do take and add more modifications to it, whether it's by chemical or whether it's by physicochemical or by just mechanical modifications, and that'll change the functionality, right? For example, if you take the starch, the fractionated starch, and simply cook it ahead of time, now you pre-gelatinize the starch. So it'll go into solution quickly. They call it the cold swelling or instantized starch. So that adds value because it'll help with certain processes. And then, of course, you have, for the proteins, you have texturized proteins, which is a big component of a lot of the plant-based products. And this one, I just wanted to show how a group of all those ingredients in the whole seed, and now you fractionate something out of it, how much of a difference does it make? So the bottom, this curve here, the black color one, this is the whole flour. And what you're looking at is the viscosity. If you take the whole flour and you try to measure the viscosity of it, it's really low. But now if you take the starch out of it and measure the viscosity of that starch, you can see how thicker it gets. A significant difference, right? So if you're looking for functionality from a particular source of raw material, think about how are you considering the whole grain versus the individual components will make a big difference. And the reason why the previous figure that shows this way is this is looking at the fractionated starch versus the whole flour. It's the same sample that was in the previous graph. You can see with the whole flour, you have all these fiber and protein that is adhered around the starch. So these are the starches, starch granules. These thicken easily. But once you have these other components in it, it interferes with the viscosity of it. So it breaks down the structure, uniformity structure, and that's why you have the reduced viscosity. So in looking at ingredients, we look at the functionality. These are some of the major functionalities that we look for. You have the solubility, think of like beverages. You're trying to make beverages, you want to increase solubility. Foaming, if you think of you want to use the protein into baked goods, like you want to make a cake, you need foaming and foam stability, or a meringue. You have gelling, plant-based meats, you want to gel and have a good gel. Thickening agents, like bakery items, as well as sweets, desserts, you need thickeners. Emulsification, pretty much required in a lot of applications. This is where an ingredient holds the oil and the water together and doesn't let it break apart, right? And then binding, of course. Binding is very important for making a plant-based product because you have a lot of different ingredients in it. So these are some of the functionalities. So when you look at, let's say, millet, a foxtail millet or a pearl millet, as a whole, you might not see what is unique about it. So typically our approach is to fractionate them and then test for functionality of individual ingredient, individual components, and see if there is something unique about it. And that's really how, if you think about the company, the mung beans are used in India for so many years, in Asia in general. But this company just figured out that, it has really good property that acts like an egg. It gels and it has a viscoelastic behavior as well. And now they have a company and they make this plant-based egg. So that's what an approach should be, where you want to figure out what is unique about these raw materials, and then that can have multiple applications. So just further breaking it down, in terms of proteins, these are the common functionalities that are unique to proteins, or proteins have a higher level of these functionalities. For starches, generally we look for this. And if you're trying to expand, expansion is for extrusion. So if starches expand, proteins don't in general, but there are ways to make them, but starches are known for expansion. And for fiber is an inert material, typically insoluble fiber. And you look for water holding, oil holding, and it does emulsify to some extent, and also for structure building. So I'm going to jump a few slides into textured proteins or the plant-based meats. So we have two kinds of raw material that are used. One is this TVP, and then the high moisture meat envelope. And I think the previous two speakers showed these, so I'll just speed through this. So for TVP is something where you extrude out of the machine, and this is dried after the extrusion, and later you hydrate. So this is a dried one, chunks here, a little pieces, crumbles, and this is hydrated, and it doesn't dissolve in water. Essentially, it has that bite characteristic to it. So you take this one and then mix with other ingredients and make the patty, a burger patty or a meatball or other things. But it's not just TVP. All TVPs are not the same. It'll never be the same because of these unique textures you get from them. So if you take a TVP and hydrate it and look at it, in our experience, these are the three typical structures you get. There's a porous structure, more like a expanded material, and then you have these fibers, and then you have these sheets. So depending on which one of these components is higher in your finished extruded product, you will get a totally different final eating experience in the food product or in the patty. So that's why you can control these based on extrusion processing characteristics, but also it depends a lot on the raw material. So the protein quality has a significant influence on what type of structure you get. And then, of course, the high moisture meat analog type products, similarly, the protein quality impacts a lot on what type of, final texture you get. And this year, what is held in hand, this is from wheat. Wheat generally texturizes the best in our experience. The other proteins don't texturize as well, but the technology is evolving. And I think in a few years, probably we'll have really good texture from all kinds of proteins. And then this is be my last concept I want to just to convey. When you think of a burger, plant-based burger, typically these are the components, ingredient components that are used. So you start with the protein, that's what provides you with the texture and the flavor. And then you have the fats. Fats are important, otherwise it won't taste good. And also it helps to hold the flavors. And then you have the binders or stabilizers. This is where you use the gums, soluble fibers, and insoluble fibers as well. That helps you hold everything together and keep it moist. And finally, the color is important for visual experience. And finally, the functional ingredients. Some people put different kinds of functional ingredients, like this heme from Impossible, but also like if you think of Beyond, they put in, I think it's the mushrooms, or a fraction of the mushroom. So you had to figure out when you develop a finished product, all these different components, how they all interact together to give the experience. And also it should also give the ability to pass that product through the supply chain and hold the quality. Because often it's a lot easier to make a nice tasting product on the bench, but you really have to consider how it's gonna weather through the supply chain, and does the final consumer gets that experience. This one I will leave it here. I'm not going to go through this, but an example of how you can make a chickenless nugget. And oftentimes, one thing I just want to highlight is how you process matters, processing sequences. I always say if all of us and in this audience are given the same formulation, same ingredients, same processing, and we are allowed to do the processing on our own, all our products will taste different because the way we process it, the way we handle things, right? It matters a lot. So it's important to, if you're a product developer, a company who's listening, you want to, specifically write down when you're developing a product, how you process each step. And what were the particle sizes? How long did you hydrate? All that matters because that's what gives the final texture. And when you scale up the product, if you have those notes, it'll make it easier. So the formulation I showed you before was used to develop this product, and it was only in one try. A few of my students did it. Right. So a few things to consider: moisture management, big part of any sort of plant-based meat product, and then fat type and fat content, and how you add the different ingredients to develop the finished product, and what type of mixing do you use, because you will end up mixing multiple times in the process. And then the final forming and the cooking process. All of these are very important to consider when you're trying to develop a plant-based product. Just some final thoughts. Always understand material composition and functionality together. It's not just the composition or not just the functionality. Both of them are important. And then how does the material interact with the process? I mean, this is where your understanding of the phase transitions of the raw materials. How does it melt? When does it melt? How much energy does it take to melt? That has an influence on what type of finished product quality you will get. And then, of course, there are post-process operations as well. How do you cool the product? How do you freeze the product? Impacts its quality. So that's, in a nutshell, how you want to consider both the raw material as well as the process to yield a good quality product that you can make consistently. Another thing I always tell to people who are young and trying to develop a food product, you develop a fantastic food product on the bench in the kitchen. Don't show it to the marketing right away. You want to repeat it a few times. Can you really make it again and again? And then you can take it forward. Because sometimes you can make a nice product, but it'll be hard to repeat it. All right, I think those are my thoughts. Some references here, I left them out, if you guys want to look at them. And that's my team. This was last year. We have a really good set of students who help out and do wonderful things. I think that's my last slide. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Ganjyal, for that comprehensive, detailed presentation. So we have a question from Fatima. I'll read out the question for you. When we add starch to plant-based meat analogs for its diverse functionality to impart textural properties, are we not compromising with the nutritional composition because it has higher than usual carbohydrates that is present in the conventional meat?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So obviously you want to, when you develop a product, look at the finished product and first figure out what are your guardrails are. In other words, okay, this is the total protein I need in my finished product. Okay. So once you get there, you add the protein. Now you have only so much flexibility with the other ingredients, right? So let's say now at this point, you use a starch and it's not giving you the binding. Okay. Now you ask me, oh, I have to increase the starch, then only I get a good quality. That means now you're going to compromise the protein level. And that's, I think, is your question. So in that case, this is where you need to look at starch functionality from different sources. So say, for example, starch from peas and starch from lentils or starch from corn or other ingredients, they all have different functionality, right? And somebody, I think in the previous presentation mentioned about high amylose, low amylose, which are waxy or native cornstarches. They also have different types of binding characteristics. So you need to, as a food scientist or as an innovator, you need to figure out like, okay, I can use only 5% starch in my formulation, but the starch I'm using today is not giving me the functionality. So then you look for another source of a starch that will give you that functionality. And then you'll be able to balance keep the protein level higher that you're designing. That's really where the innovation is. Hopefully I answered that question.
Thank you. I see Dr. Saikat's hands raised. You have a question?
Yeah, Dr. Girish, thank you for your excellent presentation and sort of telling us the different aspects that get into actually getting the texturized protein or the IIMR meat analog. I had a small question here, just to understand how much of effort do you put in your studies in terms of modifying the functionalities? Because I assume you would have a native functionality, but beyond that, you also have an opportunity to modify. So could you just briefly take us if you had done something like that, just to understand? Thank you so much.
Yeah, very good question. And that kind of leads into like when we fractionate something, I'm talking from an industrial perspective. When you fractionate something on a large scale, or even on a lab scale, you will typically lose the functionality that is already, or the native conformation of the protein. You're going to lose it no matter what. It will modify into something else. And often what we try to do is in the processing, let's not try to disturb the primary and the secondary structures. Let's manipulate the tertiary quaternary structures of the protein so that you change the total charges or you change, typically that's what we try to do. That way we can add new functionality. And if we can figure out, for example, the soy industry has done this tremendously, where they find ways to increase the molecular weight of the protein. So for example, they use steam injection processing to do that. But of course, we can always argue that you add steam, you're going to denature. But what we found is you can add the steam and remove the steam quickly. So whatever the change you try to do it quickly, then you don't denature the protein completely. So you will manipulate the quaternary structures, and that adds more functionality. So that's one way. But also the other way we look at is we try to look at chemical modifications. But again, there is a limitation on that in the sense, what type of chemicals can you use so that the consumer point of view, you're not adding too many other components to it. But the other one that is most commonly acceptable is the hydrolysis. So enzymes are used to hydrolyze. Those are more friendly from the consumer perspective. But only functionality you do with that is solubility. You're going to chop up the chains. Now you lose the original conformation completely, but it increases solubility tremendously. So those are some ways we look at. Yeah.
Sure. So thank you so much, and definitely I'll connect you offline, maybe over email to further discuss.
Awesome.
I look forward. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Girish. Now I request Dr. Padma to complete the final leg of this webinar. Over to you, Padma.
Thank you, Harini. So I'll share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yes, it is visible. Yeah.
Is it moving? It's moving, right?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Harini. Good evening, all of you. So I'm very glad to be part of this ISPIC webinar series and happy to share the forum with experts. I am sure that you have all heard to the experts and understood the nuances of plant protein and their applications and for the smart protein products. So what I'll do is I'll take you all through an interesting resource launched by our Good Food Institute's US affiliate, which is the Plant Protein Primer, which is a ready reckoner document which discusses various aspects of plant-based proteins with respect to their nutrition, functionality, pricing, and source. So I'll take you all through the Plant Protein Primer, and then I will explain you what is the relevance of building a similar primer in the Indian context. So I'll also give some of my suggestions, and I would then leave it to you to put your own thoughts and build this primer, which is the problem statement to be addressed. So let me begin with my presentation. So what is a plant protein primer? So as I mentioned earlier, the plant protein primer consolidates information on plant protein functionality, price, availability, and sources, and other key aspects related to its applicability for development of alternative protein products. So what is the motivation to build a plant protein primer? Because there is a growing consumer demand for plant-based products, and we know that soy and wheat are the major ingredients that are being used currently, and the alternative protein industry is looking forward to diversify their ingredient basket. So we are in the urge to explore novel plant protein sources for application in plant-based meat, dairy, and egg products. And also there is a need for guidance to manufacture products that meet the consumer requirements whilst achieving the taste and the price parity. So the industry wants a go-to source to which will help them to select their ingredient, compare it with the available resources, and come to a conclusion, yes, this ingredient will be more suitable for my end product applications. So this plant protein primer is a go-to resources for industries working on the plant-based foods. So why do we need this? Because the plant proteins are diverse. We have different categories of plant proteins, like as it is depicted here. So you have cereal proteins, legumes, oil seeds, nuts, and tubers. And it is always important to understand and validate the parity between the plant protein fractions in comparison with the animal derived proteins, because only if we understand what plant proteins are capable of, then we can tailor and tune it to be a part of the plant-based food products. So that is very important. So it is always essential to have a comparative analysis between plant proteins and animal proteins, and also elucidate where the plant proteins stand compared to the animal derived proteins. So before I go into the content of plant protein primers, I would like all of you to register this image in your mind. So because like the plant protein primer is essentially, it actually deals with a part of this value chain diagram. So this is a value chain of the plant-based foods, which involves 3 stages. So one is the crop development stage, that is like identifying the suitable crop resources for defined end product applications. And then also optimizing these crop sources to have the desirable food functionality traits. So this is the first step of the value chain, and followed by the ingredient processing, because the raw materials, so for example, the plant proteins have to be isolated. And in many cases, the plant proteins may not inherently have the characteristics that would make it suitable for it to be an ingredient in a plant-based meat product. So we may have to functionalize it using different techniques, which could be mechanical, chemical, biological, to create the optimal ingredients for the end product. So this comprises the ingredient optimization stage of the plant-based value chain. And of course, the last step is the end product formulation and manufacturing. So we have to choose the right technology to texturize these plant proteins into the end products. So essentially, the plant protein primer deals with the ingredient optimization as well as the end product manufacturing aspects of the value chain. So maybe you will understand, like as I take you through the rest of my slides, so you will understand how this plant protein addresses these 2 sections of the value chain. So moving forward, so with this understanding, so the content of my presentation would be to take you all through the different sections of the plant protein primer. So I would just highlight, because you can always go back and read the resource on our GFI global website, but I will just take you through the different sections and what is the relevance of each section and how it applies to industry which is involved in plant-based food manufacturing. And then I will introduce you to the relevance of building a plant protein primer in the Indian context. Like, why do we need this resource in an Indian context? And also, like, I would suggest you some approaches on how to go about building the Indian plant protein primer, which would be a similar go-to resource for our Indian stakeholders. So, so this is our plant protein primer. So these are the contents of the plant protein primer document. So first section talks about a general overview or introduction to plant proteins and their choice parameters, processing and functionality. And then the key feature of this plant protein primer is it discusses 19 different plant protein sources and mentions their functionality and also their nutritional composition. So it gives a comparison as well as detailed analysis of their nutritional profile as well as the functionality, in addition to 25 other resources which have the potential to be ingredients, but they are underutilized. So that the primer also comprises details of that. And then next, it also details the strategies for combining different plant proteins, because like as we have understood from the other presentations, so different plant proteins have different amino acid composition, level of digestibility, bioavailability. So sometimes we may have to complement the limiting amino acid in one particular plant protein with another plant protein that is rich in what this particular thing is deficient of. So we should have some strategy to devise a combination of different plant proteins. So this document also highlights the approach for this. And also the next, the final sections deals with the consumer perceptions of plant protein. So this is from a US perspective. So we have to translate this into an Indian perspective. That is very important. And next is the processing of plant proteins, which is nothing but the end product formulation that I mentioned. So it gives some examples of key products like plant-based meat, egg, dairy, yogurt, and cheese. So they have selected some 5 or 6 products, and they have discussed the production profiles for these product categories. So this is the overall content of the plant protein primer. So first, let us go to the first section. So first one is the choice parameters, because these parameters, why it is important to have this section, because these parameters are those that govern the selection of an optimum plant protein. So so to know whether this protein is suitable or not, we should know the amino acid composition, and then we should know like its allergenicity properties, whether it has any allergenic properties, and then its source, from where it is available, is it readily available, so that we don't have any supply chain bottlenecks, and also, of course, the food safety and regulatory perspectives, and more importantly, its functionality. Because functionality, so we know that there are different functional properties like water absorption, oil absorption, foaming, emulsification. So not all proteins have all the functionality. So we should try to map which of the functional properties that the different plant proteins have. So this is why this section is relevant. And then the next step is the protein processing, because like often proteins are extracted. That means they are isolated from the other macromolecules like starch and fat to improve their concentration and like yield, purity, and functionality. So proteins are often extracted, and this extraction step is a key step because it has a significant influence on the protein types recovered, its functional properties, and it also determines like whether the proteins are intact after the processing. So it really depends on which kind of plant protein extraction method that we use, whether we use a physical method, whether we use a chemical method like an isoelectric alkali precipitation method, or an air classification method, which is a physical method. So it really depends like what kind of protein extraction method we use. So it's important to understand that. So, and also, as Dr. Girish mentioned during his presentation, so we have to improve certain things and also enhance certain things before we use these proteins for developing products. So we have to improve the processability, reduce the anti-nutrients, and also improve their functional properties. So this extraction method governs all of these. So that is why this protein extraction section is really relevant. And then this is a general scheme of protein extraction from plant sources. So first is the separation and cleaning, followed by milling, and it could be a solvent extraction, and then or it could be a physical process, as I mentioned earlier, like air classification, or it can involve an enzymatic hydrolysis or a chemical extraction method. So all of this govern the end quality of the protein that we obtain from the plant sources. So next comes the functionality, which I highlighted before. There are different functional properties which really determine which kind of proteins will be suitable for a plant-based meat product or a plant-based egg product. For example, in the case of a plant-based egg product, the main property that is involved is the foaming and emulsification capacity. So to mimic the conventional egg product. So likewise, for different functional properties are related to the end product application. So it is very important to understand and map the functional properties of the plant protein. So the different functional properties are listed here. And next, the important part of the plant protein primer is they have chosen certain criteria to compare the plant proteins, different plant proteins available. So to grade them as excellent, good, okay, low, and poor. So these are the different criteria, which is like protein concentration, the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, which Dr. Roopa mentioned, and then its allergen risk, availability, flavor. So it should not have any off odor or undesirable taste to it, and also it should have a appropriate functionality to suit the end product development. And also the price parity is very important, because to achieve a comparable price with that of the animal-based meat products. So these are the criteria identified in the primer to evaluate the plant-based proteins. And this table, so it uses a color code. If you can see that there is a color code of like green for excellent and yellow for okay. So then the table actually explains the comparative analysis by means of these color code, so that it is easy to understand. So as I said, this protein primer explains 19 different protein sources. So which is actually, this is designed from a US perspective. So we have to identify what are the indigenous crops of India, because so we have a lot of native crops which are rich in proteins. So we can also think about forming a similar list. Maybe some things will overlap, but we'll have additional protein sources as well. And so these are like typically categorized under legumes, pulses, oil seeds, vegetables, fruits, and nuts. So these are the 19 sources that are listed in the plant protein primer. So one example I am just showing you here. So this is the example of chickpea. So you can see the different sections covered here. So one is the snapshot of the protein quality, which was earlier, which was depicted in the previous slide, and then followed by, so what is the source of this crop, which region is cultivates this more, followed by what is its nutrition score, like for example, the PDCAS value, what are the limiting amino acids, and also this functional property. So what kind of functional properties this particular plant protein has, and then the related application. So this is strongly related to the functional properties based on which it can be used in meat analogs, plant-based dairy, etc. And they've also given some product examples, the products that are available in the market. So this is one example. And next, as I mentioned, is a strategy for combining plant proteins. So it could be based on the amino acid composition. So we can try to match the resolve the problem of a deficient amino acid in one particular plant protein by combining it with the other. Or it could be related to the consumer perception, like based on what consumers want in their product, availability, of course, functionality, and the cost aspect. So these are the different criteria that could be considered for devising a strategy for combining plant proteins. So these are some examples. So you don't have to limit to these examples. For example, this is the combination between chickpea and rice. So what they have written is like by combining these two plant protein sources, they have increased the PDCAS, because by combining a legume with a grain, so that they complement each other with respect to their essential amino acid profile. This is just one example. And then the next section talks about the product, the end products. So as I mentioned, so they have selected some products like plant-based meat, fish, milk, yogurt, cheese, and eggs. So each of this profile contains detail on the composition of the particular product, like what are the ingredients in that product, and what does the consumer expects. Because like if one wants to shift from a conventional animal product to a plant-based food, so what is the consumer expectation, and in what forms these products will be preferably consumed, and what are the areas of opportunity, because this has very interesting future scope for research. There are various avenues to explore. So what are the areas of opportunity based on the current state of the art that is available, and it also gives a process diagram for the how this product is produced, like what are the steps involved in the end product formulation. For example, in the case of plant-based meat products, so extrusion technology will be the key technology. In case of plant-based milk, it is the homogenization. So it also lists the process flow chart for each of these product developments. So I have given an example here of plant-based meat and fish. So you can see the flow chart here. So how the ingredients are combined, mixed, formed, and then processed to get the final product. So you can see here. So what is the expectation? So it should have the characteristic flavor, texture, and appearance of the, it should mimic that of the conventional animal product. It also should provide the like nutrients like protein, fat, and iron. And this lists the areas of opportunity. So this we can understand by reading through the existing resources and then identify these white space opportunities in this area in terms of texture, flavor, variety, consumer experience, and also the cost, health, and authenticity. So this is just one example. So likewise, the plant protein primer has for the other products as well. So this is for the plant-based milk. Similarly, so you can see the process at the top, followed by the composition and the expectation. This is for the egg. So if you can see, like in the case of eggs, it is like mentioned here. So in what forms it is consumed. So it could be as a whole food, boiled, scrambled for functionality, as an ingredient in other foods like baked goods, because eggs are used as structuring ingredients, foaming ingredients in cakes and other bakery products. So even the plant-based egg alternative should be able to cater to all these needs, or as a replacement for whites, yolks, or whole. So this is actually a very interesting area. So we are still looking for a versatile plant-based ingredient which can actually deliver all these functions and can be converted to any form that in what way the conventional egg is consumed. So I would definitely suggest this as a scope of opportunity. So now I'll move on to the relevance of plant protein primer in the Indian context. So what are the key drivers for plant protein primer in the Indian context? Because as stated by a USDA industry report, India is a burgeoning market for plant-based meat alternatives. We have a lot of potential here. So for which we really have to unleash the potential of our indigenous crops. And we are like India's crop diversity is tremendous, including crops such as millets, pulses, legumes, and oilseeds. But we have to understand the potential of these crops, and we also have to devise methods to functionalize these proteins and make them suitable for the plant-based foods. And supply chain driven needs. So as of now, there are only 8 major ingredients that are used for developing plant-based products, like you all know, like soy, wheat gluten, canola oil, sunflower oil. So when we continue to use these ingredients for a long time, so we will face a burden on our supply chain. So there may be lack of supply of these key ingredients. So that is why this is the right time to explore newer ingredients to serve as raw materials for this plant-based food industry. And based on my experience with GFI India, so I have been with GFI India for the last 8 months. I've interacted with a lot of startups and industry players. They come up with really interesting questions. So I would suggest that so we need to address these questions in the Indian plant protein primer. So these are some of the questions that I have received. Like startups have asked, is there a comparative data available between the environmental and carbon footprint of plant-based proteins versus the animal-derived proteins? So this is essentially the sustainability part, right? So like they really want to validate their claims. So when they go to the consumer, they want to know like how better is plant-based protein, how far it is more sustainable than the animal-derived proteins. And the next question that we always get from our stakeholders is, what is the effect of concentration process? Because when we have a process, maybe a dry fractionation process or a wet fractionation process followed by other purification techniques like ultrafiltration. So how does it affect or influence the sustainability advantage of plant proteins? And what is the comparative picture of plant proteins from the indigenous crops versus the animal protein? So we can have one particular animal protein as a gold standard and then compare the plant proteins against it. So they always come to us for such data. And of course the technical specifications. And they like another question is, what is the taste and price parity of Indian origin plant proteins, and who are the suppliers for the plant protein ingredients? And of course, what are the novel and untapped Indian crops that have the potential to serve as protein sources? So these are the questions that we have come across in our experience. So with this, I would like to suggest some approaches and also some go-to resources which will help you to build the Indian plant protein primer. So initially, you have to understand the Indian crops. What are the different types of Indian crops? What is their food composition, the micronutrient composition, proximate, and everything. So this is one of the resources which tabulates the details of Indian crops, which is the Indian food composition table. So I have shared the links here, and Harini will be dropping the links in the chat box as well for your reference. And also GFI India has developed a library of resources wherein you have more than 100 published articles, theses, and patents in this area. So which you can visit our webpage and access this library, which will give you a list of related or relevant publications in this area so that you can understand the current state of the art. And also, there are interesting patents published by Indian plant protein ingredient manufacturers. So one such is a patent published by Devigare Biosolutions, Mysore, which explains the potential of cowpea-based protein concentrates for food products and the method of manufacturing the same. So from here, you can understand what are the different extraction techniques that the Indian players are using to get an intact protein with good functionality for plant-based food products. So I have just given an example here, so you can always explore the literature, published literature, and build your knowledge. And of course, our GFI India resources also has a lot of documents on that explains the perception of Indian consumers about plant proteins and plant-based foods. So you can go through all these resources to understand what Indian consumers, what is the perception of Indian consumer with respect to plant proteins and plant-based foods. And these are like some of my thoughts, like based on my experience, but I would leave that to you. Just these are my suggestions. Like apart from the sections in the global plant protein primers, if we have some new sections to make our Indian plant protein primer interesting, it would be great. So based on the questions that I discussed with you, so if you can have a collated data on the resource requirements, like how much of water, how much of energy is associated with different protein fractionation techniques. So the general understanding is that the dry fractionation techniques are more sustainable than the wet fractionation techniques in terms of the energy utilization and requirement for water. So I have just given you a sample here. So this explains the energy required, energy consumed at each step of a dry protein fractionation process, which uses the air classification technique. So there are resources on that. So, or like it can be also calculated based on the data available. So I've just given an example of comparison between dry fractionation. What is the kind of energy and water requirement between dry fractionation and wet fractionation? So it'll be good to have a collated data on that. And also the strategy for developing a composite blend of flour or protein isolates. So this would be in the context of Indian crops, say, for example, millets and pulses. So you can consider their essential amino acid profile and food functionality traits and devise your suggest your strategies on how two protein sources could be combined to build a complete protein that will be on par with the animal derived protein. And of course, the list of like how the US plant protein primer discusses about like 25 additional resources of protein. We can also list the underutilized indigenous crops of India along with their composition, to which would demonstrate their potential as future sources of plant proteins for the industry. And one more new section that we can include is the a directory kind of a resource at the end of the protein primer, so which would list the potential startups and corporates involved in the manufacturing of plant-based protein. So I have listed some examples here, so you're free to go search and then make your own directory of the stakeholders who are involved in the sector. And one more thing which is not touched in the global primer, which we can potentially explore, is the list of potential agri-food industry side streams. We may not have the data for everything, but we can search this, and because we have also received queries on how to use de-oiled cakes of rice bran, groundnut, and sunflower seeds as source of protein. So we can share some data on the protein content of these side streams and highlight its potential, and also like spent coffee material, which is also a potential source of protein. So I've just given a few examples. So please feel free to go explore the side stream fractions and their protein potential. So with this, so this is the problem statement to be addressed. So to build an in-depth dashboard of plant protein ingredients that would aid next generation smart protein product development by capturing parameters like nutritional quality, functional properties, processing strategies, and price points. So I hope that this presentation gave you some clarity of how to approach this problem statement and what are the go-to resources that would help you build this Indian plant protein primer. So if I'll be happy to take up any questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Padma. That was super interesting. So we have a question from Fatima. Dr. Saikat, can I please complete this question, and then I'll pass the forum to you?
Yeah, that's just I'm being a bit proactive. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, doctor. Yeah. So Padma, the question is, should we need to choose an ingredient as alternative protein from plant, or we can choose alternative fat binders or any ingredients that is needed for plant-based food from plants to include in the primer?
So thank you, Fatima, for this question. The problem statement focuses on developing a plant protein primer. So the focus will be on proteins. Of course, this is an interesting thing which you have suggested, but the focus should be on proteins. But maybe as a future scope, or as a last final section, we can also include other ingredients. But the focus should essentially be placed on proteins.
I think Dr. Saikat can address his point now. Dr. Saikat?
Okay, so my question is with respect to the primer that you're developing, one challenge which most of even we are facing is access to the infrastructure. It could be in terms of the pilot facility or equipment, or even say, for example, the air jet milling is not easy to access. So also a database of probably infrastructure available with the partners could be something useful in this. I don't know whether I missed that out, but that should be one component which needs to be added.
Yes,
Thank you.
agreed. So we already, but the thing is, GFI India has already developed an infrastructure database, which our community stakeholders hold access to. We have compiled the equipment, like infrastructure available at different institutes. Like we have categorized it as plant-based, fermentation-derived, and cultivated meat-based infrastructure. So that resource is already available. But if like any additions to that or any suggestions to improve that would always be welcomed.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we can close now. Many thanks to the speakers for spending their valuable time with us and taking us through this interesting topic. I believe the participants would have really enjoyed this and learned so much from all of you. Participants, please spend a few minutes in the networking session. We are just a couple of days away in closing the teams for you to proceed for the next phase. So it would be great if you can take part in the networking session on Meetaway. This is for Smarter Folks. And thank you to all the attendees who stayed back. I know this is a bit late, but we really appreciate your engagement. And please do write to ispic@gfi.org. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to forward those to the speakers and get them answered for you. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all for your time and attention.